Canada may be known for its breathtaking landscapes and friendly people, but the reality of living here is becoming increasingly difficult. Every year, things seem to get tougher. Skyrocketing housing prices, unbearable cost of living, and a job market that doesn't seem as inviting as it once was. More and more people are finding themselves struggling just to get by. So, what's going on? Why is Canada, once known for its high quality of life, now becoming a challenging place to live? Stick around as we dive into the harsh truths about life in Canada today and why it keeps getting worse. You might think this is a story you've heard before, especially from places like the United States, but Canada's situation is different in a few key ways. To illustrate this, consider the growing disparity between wages and housing costs. In the US, despite housing costs rising, wages have generally kept pace. But in Canada, since 2000, wages have lagged far behind, while home prices have exploded. This discrepancy has made home ownership unaffordable for many Canadians, with ownership rates gradually declining since 2011. This has particularly affected middle-aged millennials, those between the ages of 30 and 40, who have seen their home ownership rates drop by over 10%. Unable to afford homes, people are increasingly renting, but the rental market isn't much better. Across Canada, rental vacancy rates are at an all-time low of just 1.5%, leaving renters to compete with hundreds of applicants for each available unit. In cities like Toronto and Vancouver, the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment is approaching $3,000 a month, and fewer than 1% of rental properties are vacant and affordable for most people. This has pushed many to the brink of financial ruin, with some even forced to live in cars or shared rooming houses to make ends meet. The situation seems to be worsening by the year. As the wage needed to afford a basic rental property continues to rise, it is becoming increasingly out of reach for those earning the minimum wage. In British Columbia, for example, people must earn nearly double the minimum wage to afford an average rental apartment. Many minimum wage workers are now forced to work longer hours just to cover rent, which limits their ability to meet other essential expenses. While all of this paints a bleak picture, Canada's economy at first glance seems to be thriving, but this is more of an illusion than reality. The Canadian economy has grown since 2020, but this growth is largely driven by an influx of over 1.8 million people entering the country. Per capita, the economy is about the same size as it was in 2018. The housing crisis is just one part of a larger issue. While Canada's population has surged, so too has the size of its government. The BC government alone grew by 23% in the 3 years following 2020, and the federal government has added nearly $2 billion in costs since 2015. This growth has been funded by higher taxes, which are only adding more strain on Canadians who are already struggling with rising living costs. When Justin Trudeau was elected in 2015, many saw it as the beginning of a new era, with hopes of fixing the challenges facing the country. However, nearly a decade later, these issues appear to have only worsened. The country's increasing difficulty in managing its economic situation has left many wondering why things have gotten so bad and whether they can ever improve. The root causes of Canada's economic struggles are tied to the same factors that fueled its prosperity in the past, namely resource extraction. As the second largest country in the world by land mass, Canada has long been rich in natural resources, particularly oil, natural gas, and minerals, with oil from the Alberta oil sands playing a central role in Canada's economic success. The extraction of these resources began in earnest during the mid-20th century and created thousands of jobs in both the extraction industries and related sectors like transportation and infrastructure. This period of resource-driven prosperity allowed Canada to diversify its economy, resulting in rising incomes and a growing middle class. By 2000, Canada's economy was quite diverse, with a dominant service sector that mirrored many other developed nations. But as the economy evolved, challenges emerged, particularly in industries that had once driven growth. Employment in oil and gas peaked in 2014 and has since declined steadily, dropping by 23% in the years leading up to the pandemic. Although oil prices helped Canada weather the global financial crisis, the volatility of the oil market is now putting a strain on the economy. This decline in traditional industries highlights broader vulnerabilities in Canada's labor market. Many of the jobs that sustained economic growth in the past were manual or routine in nature, making them increasingly vulnerable to automation. Sectors like manufacturing, resource extraction, and agriculture are at the forefront of automation, threatening job losses, especially for those in lower-skilled, lower-wage roles. This shift toward automation is likely to exacerbate inequality, particularly in rural areas where these industries were once the backbone of local economies. Provinces like Alberta, Newfoundland and Labrador, and parts of Ontario are likely to experience the greatest job displacement as automation continues to reshape key sectors. The housing crisis is closely tied to rising unemployment and inequality, and its impact is amplified by Canada's massive geography. Despite being one of the largest countries in the world, 80% of Canadians live within 100 miles of the U.S. border, with half of the population concentrated in this narrow southern belt. Ontario, which accounts for 38% of Canada's GDP, serves as the country's economic hub. This concentration of population and industry has resulted in skyrocketing housing prices in urban areas like Toronto and Vancouver. While major cities like these have long been expensive, the situation has reached new extremes. For example, in Toronto, the average family now needs to earn $280,000 per year just to afford a home, while the average income is only around $122,000. This makes home ownership increasingly unattainable for many Canadians. The shortage of housing has become a major issue, and it's compounded by Canada's historically low housing supply compared to other OECD nations. At about 424 housing units per 1,000 people, Canada's supply is among the lowest, making it difficult for people to find a place to live. In fact, it now takes an average of 15 years to save for a down payment on a home, a significant increase from past decades. The number of homes listed for sale has steadily declined since 2015, and in 2022, only about 26,000 new homes were completed, far below the demand. This housing crisis is closely linked to Canada's immigration policies. While immigration is crucial for economic growth, it has also contributed to the strain on housing. In 2023, Canada welcomed a record number of immigrants, many of whom settled in already overcrowded urban centers, further intensifying the competition for housing. The number of international students alone tripled from 2011 to 2023, and the influx of non-permanent residents has driven up rental prices, particularly in cities like Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. There is growing concern that the government is relying too heavily on immigration to address short-term labor shortages without considering the long-term consequences on living standards. In addition to the housing crisis, Canadians are also facing higher costs for essential services like telecommunications and banking, with fees that are among the highest in the world. A lack of competition in these sectors is driving up prices, making it harder for people to make ends meet. As a result, 66% of Canadians now feel financially trapped, delaying major life decisions like buying a home, starting a family, or retiring. Despite these overwhelming challenges, solutions to Canada's economic problems are possible. To address the housing crisis, Canada needs a bold commitment to building affordable homes, reforming zoning laws, and incentivizing private sector investment. While politically difficult, these measures are realistic and could have a significant impact in the long run. However, solving the crisis will require coordinated action across federal, provincial, and local governments, as well as public investment in infrastructure and social housing. While these efforts will take time, a sustained focus over the next decade could begin to make housing more affordable and improve the quality of life for Canadians.